The following video was presented by Audience on Demand, programmatic advertising from Publicis Media. Find out more on audienceondemand.de.
Thanks very much to Adzine and Adtrader for having me here today. Before I get started, perhaps you can help me get to know you a little bit. How many of you are with brands? How about with agencies? Okay, hopefully I have some value for you guys. How many of you with publishers and ad tech companies? Wow. I don't have as much value for you guys. You know, we're talking about walled gardens, and I start off by saying, what's the concern? Why is everybody so nervous? I mean, Google and Facebook, they get to run their business. They have investors who demand returns, and they get to make decisions for how they're going to run their business for their best benefit. They're not evil. They're capitalists, right? And yet there is a lot of concern. Last year in the US, Flashtalking did a survey of 200 senior brand executives and agency executives and asked them about how they felt about their relationship with Google and Facebook. And about almost 60% were okay with it. About 40% were very uncomfortable. And, you know, you might think that it's about price, but it wasn't. What made advertisers uncomfortable is that it's an asymmetrical relationship with Google and Facebook. It seems that they have all the power, and that as brands and as agencies, we have very little. That manifests itself in concerns about transparency. The feeling that they're not telling us the whole story. They're not giving us the information that we need to make good investment decisions. And that perhaps even that they're using your data against you. Concerns were rooted in the data. And yet, despite the fact that 40% of the people said that they were deeply concerned, almost all of them continued to do business at a very, very high level with both Google and Facebook. So, an incongruence there. Let's see if and the result of that is Google and Facebook now dominate advertising. As of the end of 2015, 60% of all online advertising flowed through Google and Facebook. And in 2016, digital advertising in the US grew 23%. And we in this industry, we'd go, that's great, we're growing. 23% is a pretty big growth rate, we're doing great. The only problem is, all of that growth, 100% of it, was from Google and Facebook. So if you were not Google and Facebook, if you're the rest of that circle, in aggregate, you grew 0. That's what makes people really nervous. And it's accelerating. So if you're an advertiser, how do you think about this? Right? How do you think about bringing some more symmetry to this relationship and getting back more influence? So the first thing I thought is, well, first, Google and Facebook are quite different. But there is a commonality there. It starts with the fact that they are providing inventory, and a lot of it. But they're platforms. They're not just publishers. They provide buying platforms. They provide infrastructure support, more Google than Facebook. And they provide data. They may not provide the data to you as advertisers or agencies, but they have data that they can make use of to drive the advertising. So that gives them quite a lot of power because it's not just inventory, it's the whole platform. And in the case of Google, that buying platform, if you're using Google's bid management platform, is being used to buy inventory that's not Google's. Maybe. We think. And if you're using DoubleClick, you're running on their infrastructure and giving Google even more visibility to what ads you're buying across the internet. So 8 steps that I'm going to recommend that you as brands and agencies can begin to do to take back some control, to build more symmetry into this relationship. Unfortunately, the first of those steps is to recognize that you're already hostages. First, we have to acknowledge the problem. So, you're going to buy search from Google. That's a given. You don't have a choice. And you're going to buy a lot of it. And if you're a retailer, you're going to buy a lot of Google Shopping. Google Shopping is going to be really important to you, and there's no place else to go. And if reaching consumers in mobile is important to you, you're going to buy Facebook, because Facebook provides the reach of the mobile consumer in a way that you just can't get anywhere else. So we're going to spend a lot of money with Google and Facebook, no matter what. That's a given. So the next thing that we can do, though, is we can engage our agencies to try to bring some more balance and give them a mission to say, I'd like to diversify. I'd like to set up my ad stack so that I'm not providing more data and insight to further unbalance this relationship. But folks, if you're going to do that, you got to pay your agency. It's so much easier to just say, I'm going to spend 75% of the dollars on Google and Facebook, a couple of places to go, and I'm done. But if you expect your agency to do the extra work to diversify your tech stack, to stitch together independent tech providers, to go to the effort to build relationships, private marketplaces and programmatic premium relationships with other publishers and inventory sources, they need to be compensated for that. And our last speaker noted that for a long time, the story was, we want all this new programmatic stuff, but we don't want to pay for it. That's not realistic. Mission your agency. Next, demand third-party measurement. We must have visibility from trusted third parties to the delivery metrics, viewability metrics, and what's working and what's not working within the walled gardens. We've all heard the stories and all the reports over the last year of issues with counting appropriately. As we are starting to get more of a view of the brand safety issues that are happening within the platforms, we can't go on this way. We must demand access to third-party verification to have comfort that we're getting what we're paying for. Moat, Integral Ad Science provide great services, work with a third-party independent ad server like Flashtalking. It's the only plug I will give for my company today. It won't come up again, I promise. You need independent partners who are not beholden to the walled gardens. And then, here's where the hard work starts. Guys, you can plan your media plans backwards. Instead of starting with the assumption that I'm going to spend a ton of money on Google and Facebook and then fill in the rest with some premium publishers, challenge your agencies to do it backwards. Start with how much inventory, how much reach can I build by working with premium branded publishers? Can I set up premium programmatic relationships in private marketplaces and get as much juice as I can out of those high quality content environments? And then after I've exhausted all of my opportunities there and got as much inventory and as much reach as I can from the branded publishers, only then spend the rest of the money with Google and Facebook. And in doing that, play them against each other. The biggest piece of leverage you have is that they are competing with each other for your dollars. Set them against each other. Once you've figured out how much you can spend productively in premium publisher environments and with independent partners, put the rest of your money on the table in between Google and Facebook and make them fight over it. Make them give you proposals. Now, you probably won't get better pricing, but you might get better thinking from them. You might get some creativity from them in terms of how they can use their data and their unique assets to bring you incremental value. And you might learn something in the process. They don't like to do this. It's extra work. They'd like you to just programmatically buy their inventory and make it easy for them. But they all have teams of folks who are trained and are pretty smart about using the assets that they have to come up with creative ways to drive your business. Take advantage of it. And for goodness sakes, don't run on their infrastructure. Every time you buy an ad that's not on Google and run it on top of DoubleClick, you're giving them information that makes them stronger. And in fact, the data that they're collecting off of your advertising and the dollars you spend to reach your consumers benefits your competitors. That is a fact. Anybody here use Adometry or Google 360 now, the attribution platform? Have you read the fine print? Some of it. Read the fine print. Google owns your data. They have the right to all your benchmarks. This is unacceptable. Do not stand for it. Finally, so there are a lot of agencies in the room. I'm sure you've all done the analysis of the metrics that Google provides on their inventory versus what third-party verification services like IAS and Moat provide. Anybody want to volunteer what the gap is, the difference? Yeah, I didn't think so. What we've seen is about a 20% difference in the quality that Google reports for their own inventory versus what third parties report. Google will report their inventory having 20% higher viewability than what the third parties do, and conversely, Google will report inventory that's not Google inventory as having lower viewability and quality than what the independents show. It's not necessarily evil. It may not even be purposeful. But in all the little choices that you make in terms of your technology and methodology, you're not going to make choices that are going to work against you. So third-party verification and independence is critical. And maybe the hardest thing I will challenge you guys to do, especially with GDPR here in Germany, it's a little easier in the US, is to create your own data asset as a brand. As we move more and more into a data-driven future, information about our consumers is going to inform everything we do. Not just the media buying, but the creative that we deliver to them. We don't want to be in a place where we're hostage to Google and Facebook's ownership of the data. Now, one of the real challenges is that the way that GDPR has been written, it actually gives more power to Google and Facebook because they have login data. So that's a challenge for you guys as advertisers to figure out how do you build direct relationships with your customers and get the permission to market to them so that you're not reliant on having to buy the data from the walled gardens and in buying that data actually not get direct access to it. Because the way it works now is you pay for it, but you don't actually get the data. So you're paying, they're using it on your behalf, but you don't actually build an asset over time. There are great technologies out there that provide the foundation for data management and for clients and agencies to build their own data assets, but the technology is not enough. There has to be long-term strategies in your company and partnerships with premium publishers who have login and subscription data to be able to build that asset over time. It doesn't happen in a year or two. But over 3 and 5 years, you can make meaningful progress in building real data assets that you own that give you leverage in negotiating with the walled gardens. And finally, no individual advertiser, even the biggest of you, is going to move the needle with the walled gardens on your own. You have to band together. In the US, we have the 4As, the American Association of Advertising Agencies, and we have the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers. Those are the two big organizations that can provide a common voice to push for change, to push for access, to push for transparency. But advertisers themselves can also band together. We're starting to see advertisers forming partnerships and kuritsus to put a joint face. P&G is gathering allies to try to lead change. Be active. Partner with other major advertisers who are not competitive with you. Find ways to share data. And mostly, make your voices heard. And lobby the EU. The GDPR is going to make Facebook and Google more powerful. Give them more power. It really flies in the face of European efforts to fight their monopoly power. But giving them more and more rights to the data doesn't act in your long-term interests. So, I clicked too fast. I'll end by saying the bigger you are as an advertiser, the more you need Google and Facebook. The more you need their reach and their scale to reach your advertisers. But there are strategies you can take to reduce that dependence. And in doing so, you can reduce your risks out into the future. I think I did that in less than 15 minutes. So I can take questions if anybody has any questions.
First of all, you can get a thank you. Thank you, John Nardone. Yeah, let's start making this interactive, please. We have a translation service, so or we can translate anyway, so you can ask in German as well if you'd like to. Who has a question or a remark to make? So that's the first chance. Guys, behind there, if you need chairs, there's chairs all over, so you don't have to stand. If you like standing, stay there. Questions? In the opening talk, Sasha said that, in his opinion, the problem or the situation of walled gardens is not here to stay. What do you think?
Well, history has said that over time, walls come down, especially if advertisers demand it. But you have to vote with your dollars or with your euros. At the end of the day, as long as we keep feeding money, there's not a need for the walled gardens to change. If we withhold money, they'll listen. But over time, walls do fall.
Over which time frame?
Well, that's a good question. I think we've got a good 5 years still ahead of us here, and it really requires more and more transparency, I think, to affect the change. We have a very deep partnership with IAS in the US, and so we've gotten to see some of the new data as they've begun to get access to Instagram. And what they're seeing is the viewability of some of these services is extremely low. It's not unusual to see campaigns to have 15 or 17% viewability. As that data becomes available to advertisers, it gives you leverage. It gives you an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm not paying for that. And when you don't pay for it, the profit motive will force change. But it will take time.
You mentioned the idea of cooperation between either advertisers or publishers. From a German perspective, that's a difficult view, I think, in my estimation. Everyone does its own job, and they fear a bit talking to each other. They fear of losing their data to the competitors, whatever there is. As a couple of these movements started in the US, is it different?
I think that there's always concern, and everybody wants to protect their interest, of course. But most publishers and most advertisers share a common view of the threat of the dominance of Google and Facebook. And so sometimes the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I think it's very important I've been with Flashtalking 2 years. Prior to that, I founded one of the first DSPs and DMPs in the US called X+1. We sold to Rocket Fuel a couple of years ago. But one of the things that we learned was the most productive campaigns that we were able to do for clients were done in partnership with big publishers, where we were able to build programmatic premium relationships, still using programmatic and data, but also leveraging the unique assets that the publisher brought to the table. And I think there's not nearly enough of that kind of cooperation going on today. To some extent, the promise of programmatic is to make the buying frictionless and make it easy. And there's value in that, but there's also value, I think, in programmatic as a means to leverage data better. And publishers bring a great amount of high-quality data to the table, as well as advertisers. And when you put them together in a cooperative way, you can really move the needle in terms of effective ad campaigns.
Great talk. Thanks a lot. John
Thank you.
Nardone.